just really quick first, my background for over 30 years, I was a speech language pathologist in a school setting. So I worked with children with variety of disabilities. And, basically to sum it up, language comprehension is reading comprehension. All right. They are inextricably linked. And I love some of the things that I've heard today, especially one young lady when she talked about the importance of education for young women. It is critically important. In fact, when you look at what's going on globally in terms of oppressing women, oppressing people of color, oppressing religious minorities, it all ties together with educational deprivation. It's not by accident. Uh, I can honestly say I have never been more ashamed to call myself an American as I am today because they elected that monster. They reelected a Nazi, and I despise him because that's not American values. Now, some of the things I'm going to be talking about really quickly, because I don't want to take too much of your time, has to do with the idea of education as liberation. You cannot liberate an entire people without basically enriching their ability to problem solve, to take the basic information and go beyond sheer memorization, to be able to creatively problem solve. And one of the reasons why the conservatives, I call them neo-Nazis, but the conservatives in the United States are so against what they call woke, so against what they call critical pedagogy, is because that encourages people to question and to think and to basically dare to dream more. Now, there was a wonderful educator long before me, a Brazilian named Paulo Freire. Now, Paulo Freire liberated his home country of Brazil by bringing literacy. And when I say literacy, I don't just mean the ability to call words, I mean the ability to think and understand what you're reading and to question and come up with new and better solutions to problems. And Lord knows this world is facing so many critical problems, everything from the environmental crisis. I won't call it global warming, I'll call it what it is. It's global devastation. Saeed and I have had multiple conversations about this. This is an issue of environmental justice. And besides being an educator, I'm a journalist, and Saeed knows this. And in fact, one of the publications I publish on is Eurasia Review, with quite a few Muslim authors as well. And they've been very generous. The fact is, there's a reason why they hate critical pedagogy, by hate woke, whatever you want to call it, because again, it dares to it dares to demand that people think. Now, I would encourage all of you to find an international translation because Freire wrote several books, and everything was about pedagogy of the oppressed, pedagogy of the poor, whatever. And you can find multiple translations, and it's absolutely shameful that in our schools of education, Freire is never mentioned, but Freire is studied in schools of philosophy. And the fact is, Freire was the great liberator, and he risked his life in order to bring literacy to Brazil. Uh, we see this reemergence of global ignorance that is so incredibly frightening. If we ever need creative problem solving and teamwork, it's now. And I know I'm kind of doing this in a very generalized way because unfortunately I have to go and teach my students in a little bit. I teach virtually. So if we look at Freire, and I wrote about this many years ago, I used to publish in Huffington Post, and this was back from 2010. All right. And, again, I was still in the school district, and I was basically refusing to just teach only the official curriculum. All right. I questioned the standards, the new standards, because they were anti-child. Um, where was the notion of true education as a liberating force for the greater good? What about the duty of every teacher to instill a sense of justice and compassion and social responsibility into our kids? When do we plant the idea that all people have the right to, as they say, speak truth to power and openly question our leaders? And when do we, the people, the right to accountability and transparency from our political leaders? And that's the nature of education. It's not merely job-related skills and literacy that are limited to what corporations want. It is a necessary component for acquiring and maintaining a sense of democracy. There is nothing more politically subversive than being a teacher. That's why they're attacking teachers so much. When you look at Freire, and I encourage everybody to do so, he's the pioneer of what they call critical pedagogy now. Um, and Freire, dared to believe that there was more to school than just learning some disconnected facts. Um, Critical pedagogy is the belief that teaching should challenge learners to examine power structures and patterns of inequality from the status quo. Uh, and, he talked about this banking concept of education. And this was from his most famous book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And he talked about how education really is it's like going to a bank and they deposit facts into your head and you're just supposed to just blindly accept it without thinking about how this affects your reality, how it affects other people's reality. Is this even relevant? I mean, this is what we're talking about here. And this particular banking concept of education is basically discouraging learners from being active participants, and it disempowers them as a result, because then that's how propaganda seeps in. All right. So the implications of Freire's ideas, you need to remember that teachers and children, students, I won't say children, say teachers and students are both learners. This is a collaborative type situation. And you do have to be a little careful of the power dynamic. While yes, there are times when perhaps the teacher is going to be more experienced than the learner, you have to acquire a certain base knowledge. That's true, but you also have to create a safe space where learners feel comfortable and encouraged to question, because that's how you learn. You do learn more from your failures than you do from your successes. That's just a fact. You want to develop critical literacy. You should think excuse me. You should think critically about the things you read and see and hear. And can you identify when a situation is an example of inequality or injustice? We should not have a blind eye to it. And you want to encourage active inquiry and curiosity-led participation. And, Freire risked his actual life bringing literacy to Brazil. And so besides Freire, there is also an author named Naomi Wolf, because you can't separate the what's the word I'm looking for? You can't separate oppression from an end to true education. Okay? When people are truly educated to think, to question, to demand a sense of fundamental fairness, it becomes very difficult for oppression to stand. Now, journalist Naomi Wolf talked about how they are propagandizing, and this extends to our schools, how our schools are propagandizing for dictators, for instance, like Vladimir Putin or Donald Trump, for that matter. And some of the things that she talked about, she wrote this book called The End of America, a letter of warning to a young patriot. And this was many years ago. And she described what she calls the 10 steps to close down an open society. And they are: 1, invoke a terrifying and external enemy. 2, create a prison system outside the rule of law for troublemakers. In other words, troublemakers being people that dare to question. 3, develop paramilitary groups to intimidate citizens. 4, set up an internal surveillance system. 5, harass citizens groups. 6, engage in arbitrary detention and release. 7, target key individuals. 8, control the press. 9, equate dissent with treason. And 10, suspend the rule of law. This was going on for some time now. And you cannot separate true education from true liberation. They go hand in hand, which is why when these oppressors, when these thugs want to take over and destroy freedom, destroy a just society, one of the first groups they go after are the teachers. So I would just, and again, I apologize that this is very quick because I do have students waiting, unfortunately, but I will close this with There is nothing more politically subversive than being a true teacher. And teaching is not merely a job or a profession, it is a calling. And I am proud to be part of that calling. Thank you, my friend.